Hey, Brandon,
Hey, Alan.
and welcome to Dice Over Everything, the miniatures gaming podcast.
So I know you have like piles of One Piece stuff on your shelf,
Oh my
but
God.
because One Piece, like the main character is like a pirate, but really is this? Are they actually being pirates in the storyline? Because from what I've heard, they're out like searching for this like lost treasure called the One Piece. But does
Yeah.
that make them pirates?
I have been thinking about this a lot since I've been working on pirate miniatures, and also since I've become obsessed with One Piece in the last 3 years. And I will say, not really.
Nobody has like
But
ownership over the One Piece, and they're like taking it away from the rightful owner.
no, there are pirates
Mm-hmm.
in One Piece.
Okay.
But it's kind of a joke in that Luffy, the main character, says he's a pirate, has ideals that you could see could be thought of as being a pirate. It's basically like he learned how to be a pirate by broken telephone. So you go in the world, and there's lots of pirates that act like pirates. And then there's Luffy and his band of guys, and you're like, what do you think a pirate is?
He's just listened to songs about pirates, not actually hung out with the real pirates.
Exactly. It's like he learned from pirates from a storybook, right? Where the pirates are the good guys. And that's actually, like, if you go... I love One Piece. I could go totally into it. But yeah, Luffy himself is not a pirate. The world has lots of pirates. It is affected heavily by pirates. But that is part of the plot and part of what makes it interesting. And you could understand why he would be a pirate.
Okay. So he may not be a pirate, but there's other pirate things going on in the world. But because the story's about him, it probably isn't. It's just an adventure.
It's more like an adventure story where he is like, says he's a pirate and he's going to become the pirate king, but the way that he acts like a pirate is it's borderline. I wouldn't say he's totally not, but I would say that it's borderline, and he's missing a lot of the things that it truly is what makes a pirate.
Okay. So I guess you have been talking about making a pirate game. Do you think are you going the Luffy route, or are you trying to go like Captain Jack Sparrow?
I thought about this so heavily as well.
What direction is this going? I guess we can talk about like what all goes into like things actually feeling like pirates in a game, because there's so many game mechanics out there, and if you pick the right one, you're going to feel like a pirate, and if you pick the wrong mechanics, you're going to feel like you're being the Luffy version of a pirate in the game.
Which could be fine in of itself. Like I said, One Piece is my favorite manga, and possibly now it might be my favorite comic book. But is it a pirate? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, specifically about miniature games and what goes into a pirate game and what makes it feel like a pirate. Because, like you said, I've been obsessed with One Piece more and more. I don't know what happened. Just in the past 3 years, I've become more and more... I've gotten more and more into One Piece. And I think it's also because I've read a bunch of other comics and I realized... Like, I got back into Japanese comics a little bit. Manga to weebs. And I have really realized that a lot of them are not very good. And a lot of the critically acclaimed ones were not very good. And so it kind of made me realize, I've been reading One Piece for a very long time, how much better One Piece is than a lot of the other media I have consumed and people find really popular. And even though, like, I guess when I was reading it, One Piece is not perfect, right? For example, Luffy, the main character, and his pirate crew could bear to be a little bit more piratey, right? Arguably, if they were more piratey, though, like, the story wouldn't work. So I can understand it, right? And it is kind of fun to have your main character who says he's going to be the king of the pirates.
Mm-hmm.
Be a kind of a crappy pirate.
Yeah, he's just cosplaying. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so like we can talk about a whole bunch of different
the
whole gamut of game mechanics and how they should act in a pirate game. Like, should there be campaigns? How the campaign should be focused? Like, I don't know where do you want to start? Like the missions? Like,
I think we should start with what is a pirate, and what are the games that have pirates, and what actually is a pirate, so we define terms and stuff like that. So in terms of games out there, miniature games, is there even a Luffy superhero pirate game? I don't think there is. There's nothing like a manga-esque pirate game. If it would be, it would literally be copying One Piece, which does not exist, at least right now. At least not in a larger scope. I'm sure there's probably a guy, just like me, who's working on a small pirate game that's like based on One Piece, which would be awesome, by the way. But I haven't really seen them. But we've played a bunch of games with pirates, and right now, part of the reason why we're talking about this, and part of the reason why I started working more heavily on the pirate game, is because I started painting Blood and Plunder.
So, I don't know. Would you even? I haven't played that much Blood and Plunder. We just did a test game of it at Adepticon 2 years ago, but because of the scale of it, it almost felt to me, and how the maneuvering, it almost felt like a rank and flank game to me, with how you would have to move things and pivot and get angles on things. Yeah, the mechanics of naval combat. I think pirates, and also just kind of biased towards skirmish games. Mm-hmm. I felt like you weren't worried about the piracy aspect, and you're more just worried about like the naval angles, gunning, doing damage.
That's a good point.
So
Blood and Plunder, pirates, golden age of piracy, is during the 1700s and 1800s. That's during all of the stuff in the Caribbean, right, where Pirates of the Caribbean is set. And although the pirates are the thing that captures a lot of people's hearts and minds, a lot of the fighting and things that happened there were not actually pirates, but they were the naval, these naval naval imperialist countries running around conquering places. So when you think about actually the main, although pirates are the things that kind of, resonates with people, they're intrinsically tied to the people who are hunting them and the true powers of that time, which were the imperialist powers, right? And so when you look at Blood and Plunder, it's called Blood and Plunder, right? Which implies pirates, right? Because
plundering pirates,
time. Exactly. But I think there is something to be said about the fact that most of the of the battles and the nations that you run, they're not the pirates. You're playing the imperial powers at that time, fighting each other, and it gets muddy because the precursors to the the Caribbean Pirates of the Caribbean kind of thing, were actually like privateers, right? Which if you look at the history, those are basically state-sponsored pirates, right?
Yeah, the mercs.
Yeah, they're mercs that go on the seas and board and attack ships of other nations, of other imperialist nations, because the imperialist nations didn't want to fight each other, right? They're trying to divide everything up directly. So they send out these privateers, which have a degree of separation from the actual state. So, that for some reason, I don't know exactly when you think about the politics, how it works out, but for some reason, it makes it slightly more okay, right? You have some sort of plausible deniability, right? I guess technically that still happens to this day, but that to me is maybe more of what Blood and Plunder was going for, right? And in that way, is there a significant difference between pirates and privateers? because technically privateers are the precursor, right? The reason why pirates exist is basically because all the empires in Europe decided to stop sanctioning these things and started. They all basically said, "Oh, let's work together and just conquer these other nations and not be as so aggressive against each other," right? And so they stopped sanctioning these privateers and instead. So all of these people felt like abandoned, right? Because they were basically doing this kind of work for these nations. And they're like, well, I'm not going to stop plundering. If I'm not getting sanctioned, I'll just do it myself illegally. And we're so far away from, the powers, right? That's what they thought, because they're generally in the New World, right? That they could plunder the Caribbean in the same thing they were doing before, but they could do it to everyone since they're only working for themselves, right? And that's how pirates happened. But was that change so significant that in terms of miniature gaming, in terms of the battles, in terms of the feeling that you want to evoke, was that such a huge difference that a privateer, which I feel like privateer is kind of what Blood and Plunder does, is it such a big thing that it doesn't feel as piratey? I guess your answer, you already said, is kind of no, right? Like it doesn't feel as like pirates because of those changes.
No, it's not like a group of like individuals going out and seeking their own glory. It's just like, no, you're having having a major power versus major power battle. You have your line of cannons firing at each other, but if you're your own like breakaway pirate crew, you're probably not rocking up with 3 giant ships. Like from the little I've read about, they're more like bringing sloops and other small ships and just doing raids. Yeah. Once that's like your normal pirates.
Threatening like them, yeah.
There's probably like there's a few like impressive pirate battles where the pirates did like take more impressive ships and like get more impressive crews, but those are like the exception, not the rule of just trying to go out and like
steal stuff and raid. Yeah,
basic sea crime. Yeah.
Funnily enough, the idea of being free and doing those kind of stuff is the thing that makes Luffy in One Piece kind of like a pirate. He's in a ship and he wants freedom, and he wants to do whatever he wants. And that is so maybe if you read One Piece, which you definitely should, you would find Luffy a pirate.
Just with he's lower on the like murder and theft thing. Yeah, we're gonna need some. So in our game, we're gonna need murder and theft, okay? Like otherwise, I'm not gonna be feeling the pirates.
All right. So Blood and Plunder, we could say I think it's definitely a privateer game, and you could argue that it's mainly a privateer game. That and I think the first edition actually was privateers, and then they moved the time scale ahead. And that's why it's more like pirates now. But I could see an argument to say that it doesn't fit quite as well as it did before. So what about the other pirate games that, or games with pirates that we played, like War Machine?
War Machine is magic cards on the tabletop.
Sure. Magic cards have pirates too.
That has pirate aesthetics in it in a few factions, but honestly, you aren't fighting. You're not like bringing
No. Yeah, sure. So of course there's the greater game of War Machine had, well, I guess the old War Machine, the new one is very, very pared down, but the old game had a bunch of mercenaries or units in other factions that were pirates. Like the pirates in Crix were a quintessential part of the faction. They're part of the faction identity, and a large part of the faction identity, actually. And one of the ones that you preferred. Like a lot of other people like the skeleton, the skeleton guys, but I felt like you seemed to, like you did have those guys because they were awesome and they look cool, but you seem to have a lot of the pirates as well, right?
Yes, because I thought they looked cooler. I have those guys. I've ripped them apart and put them on Infinity figures, as you saw yesterday.
Yes.
But I found the pirate aesthetic cooler. But it was just the aesthetic. As far as the gameplay, I find it hard to actually say there was like you weren't trying to like get stuff and bring it back in War Machine. You were just trying to hang out on the objective or try and cause some murder. But
So the gameplay, the core gameplay didn't feel very piratey. You could say it felt more like, like World War I or World War II, like take inch by inch and hold on to the ground kind of thing, right?
Yeah, you had your long-range artillery pieces, you had your close-up charges. It was very, very traditional wargamey. You weren't trying to capture the opponent's commander and take them back because they're the illegitimate privateer. It's just like, no, we're just in the war.
Sure. But then did the pirates feel more, besides the aesthetic of how they looked, which was, they were ghost pirates. To me, my favorite were the ghost pirates, right? Mm-hmm. Was there something that made them feel piratey as opposed to just random ghosts or random skeletons and things like that? Or the other pirates, the, what do you call it? The horned pirates?
The statistics?
Yeah, raiders.
No, so they felt piratey too, because I would describe most of the pirate units that I played with, at least, as having a very hit and run play style. They weren't like your cannon unit. They weren't your like big armored knight charging. They were very like light glass cannon. They couldn't take hits very well because you don't expect pirates. Like you really start taking shots as a pirate and you're screwed. Yeah. They had the very hit and run, which I would say it has some pirate gameplay style to it.
Like pirates don't have armor because if you're wearing armor in the sea and then you go overboard, you're dead.
Yeah. They would cause like weird effects to hurt your enemies rather than just like delivering crushing blows. So yeah, you could say on that side, Privateer Press did get a little bit of pirate feel with the models matching the rules. Yeah, there's a bit of that going on.
So the hit and ride, the fast movement and things like that, not having like super heavy artillery. Although one of the things with pirates is cannons, is it not? Because you have a ship and you have big cannons, and one of the, you could say that's more of a naval, 17th century naval combat kind of thing. But I feel like the cannon is, because they operated during that period of time, and very important for the aesthetics, is it not? Or do you think it matters or not?
So they made that unit. It was just terrible for its points, so I never bought it. Like, let's just be real. This is War Machine here. You're not trying to lose.
Yeah.
And there was some other like undead cannon holding bloated dude who took its place. So that's just a matter of balance. If they got the balance right, you could have done it. But again, it's part of the price.
Sure. I could see how like the giant cannon is not necessarily as important to the pirates, because even though they have cannons and they're supposed to be powerful relative to like a normal human, like you could say a skirmish thing, when you think about you blow it up to a larger scale battle, pirates should not have the most powerful cannons.
No, they shouldn't have a good way of like dragging a cannon onto the ground. Like you think if you're attacking defensive position, they've got their cannons on their ramparts and stuff like that. Shoot your whatever you've got as you approach. But yeah, the pirates just showing up on shore. Yeah. They're not hauling a cannon in with them. That's not hit and run.
Yeah, and I think even when you think about like heavy cannons and things like that, think about Pirates of the Caribbean, right? The Imperial powers are the ones who had overwhelming cannon power, right? And then the pirate ships were supposed to be lighter and faster with less cannons, and they had to like basically outflank, outmaneuver the larger guys to win, right? That feels like the piratey way. Beating a guy with overwhelming firepower does not feel piratey.
No.
All right. Okay, so Blood and Plunder, War Machine, what other games have had pirates in them? Infinity has a couple. Space Pirates. I don't think those even count. I was just throwing that in because I like Infinity.
Honestly, just thinking about the mechanics before this, Necromunda feels very much like you're committing piracy. When you think about the objectives of the game. Like the game's not well. The game's not well. Like the gameplay is terribly written.
You're talking about the new one.
Yeah, the new like this, the whole.
The new one or the old one?
I think the new one. Honestly, the missions in it, everything about like it's all pulled off terribly, but just the whole feel of Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately.
No. I agree. I'm just like, just hot takes.
Yeah, but like you're fighting.
At this point, it's not a hot take. We've mentioned it many times. We're not that fond of it, but go on.
Yeah, people like it, but not because of like the gameplay quality. They like it because of like the story and the models and all that, which is fair.
It is fair.
But like as far as what you're doing, like there's things where you're taking captives. The whole thing of getting like more territory as you win, mm-hmm. You're like, oh, I expand my network as this pirate king by getting the territories. Not that that's a good mechanic, but you feel like you're like expanding your influence as the pirate king. You're grabbing like booty and getting money. Like,
sure,
if you switch that out for pirates, you'd be like, yeah, this is like we're committing piracy here
sense.
Against each other.
I would say the one thing is like expanding out territory is not quite the pirate thing. Mm-hmm. I feel like that is one thing that could be, but I feel like pirates generally are like the idea when you think about a pirates is a pirate crew and a pirate boats. So in terms of territories, it's not territories that pirates get. It's larger crews, right? Larger ships so you can go raid more, right? When you think of a greater pirate fleets, like there's the greatest, I forgot the name of it, the greatest pirate fleet, which is in Asia, where was actually a woman pirate, and then she actually became so powerful, they're just like, can you just retire? We'll pay you off. And she literally retired.
Yeah.
All right. While I look this pirate up.
Well, also like in Necromunda, you kind of like increase the size of your crew as well, because you're like, oh, we brought more people on board because we're doing super well here. So.
Yeah, I guess that is okay. Pirate fleet, Zhang Yisao. Mm-hmm. All right. Anyways, Qing Shi apparently, for how awesome she was after she died. She died in retirement. But anyways, I think that's widely regarded as the most successful pirate ever. But that's a good point, right? For Necromunda is that pirates, they're really just bandits or thugs on the sea, right?
Yep.
So all of that kind of themes, a lot of them are similar. Except I feel like pirates have, obviously a certain time period. But again, you can have space pirates and everything. So like you have bandits, stealing, robbery, larceny, and then you attach that with being on a ship. That to me, if you take those things where instead of having a home base, you have a ship, then suddenly, instead of being a bandit, you're a pirate.
So where Necromunda has you getting more territories as like a measure of your power, you should, in a pirate game, really just be having a cooler kitted out ship.
Yeah, bigger and bigger ships, and then once you get big enough, multiple ships, and like ships under your command as the Grand Admiral of a pirate fleet.
Yeah, so I don't know if that works like for balance mechanics of the game, but in theory, it's what should happen. But for mechanic wise and balance, you probably don't want to go the Necromunda route of becoming bigger and bigger and more powerful like they did with the territories, which just like kicks your opponent to the curb, and then the campaign's over after 3 games.
Now, the other thing, going backwards, like the opposite in time. So Necromunda's in the future, and it's like a piratey kind of thing in the future. And arguably, rogue traders are like pirates, which is the original design for 40K. But going back in time, Ghost Archipelago, Frostgrave Ghost Archipelago, feels, in my opinion, quite piratey, even though the time period in Ghost Archipelago is pre gunpowder. So there's no cannons, and there's no
muskets and pistols.
No muskets and pistols. So there's not as much ranged combat, but it is basically the Sinbad era of the 7 Seas era of piracy, right? And so when we think about it, like obviously to us, right, we think about historically what are pirates? They are the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? The golden age of piracy. But sea raiders is a long history, right? And so if you go to the Sinbad era, I feel like in many ways the Sinbad era is almost more fun in my opinion than with the guns and everything. Like I love the guns and everything, and it's a different aesthetic and a different kind of thing. But like the Sinbad area you have the same kind of thing like you're talking about, right? You have the same kind of feelings of being free, raiding, stealing, moving fast, taking stuff and running away. But by removing the guns, everything becomes a lot more close in. You have the swashbuckling, right? Without the idea that people are just pulling out guns and stuff like that to shoot people, and without the cannons, boarding the opponent's ship feels a lot more doable, right? So this is basically like you still have Age of Sail. It's not the Age of Sail, but like, is it the Age of Sail? I don't know if that's technically the Age of Sail, but like everyone has sailing ships still, but boarding becomes a lot more important, right? Because you can't just point your cannons at them and say surrender, right? So that idea, that swashbuckling, especially when you're talking about a skirmish game, it can be a lot more fun. The issue I feel like with Frostgrave Ghost or Archipelago Go, even though Frostgrave was my favorite game, I felt like the difference in that kind of thing of giving the people powers didn't quite work for me. So maybe it was just a gameplay thing.
Okay.
But what do you think of? Do you remember the few times we've played Ghost Archipelago? And do you remember it actually?
I don't think we played it, did we? I really
yes,
don't.
We have.
No, we did.
It's a long time ago. This game came out like over 5 years ago or 6 years ago or something like that. We did play it when it first came out. I tried playing it more. It just did not. It didn't work for me.
Maybe the models we played with didn't resonate, so it didn't stick in my brain. We just played with some like random pirate models. We might have been using like random War Machine models, so it didn't register to me that we were playing with pirates. So.
I did buy some like pieces to make more tropical terrain, right? That's honestly one of the things I was doing with water boards and things like that. No, wait, the water board was not. So the tropical terrain was. I didn't make water boards for it. That was for Blood and Plunder and pirate games. But yeah, so the thing that made it cool is you have your crew, you're running around, and this is a Sinbad era thing. Like there's no gunpowder, a lot of movement, like you said, small skirmish units. Right, you have a small team trying to go in, grab the treasure, and run off. It feels perfect for that idea of piracy and raiding.
Yeah, I have the rules. I just haven't read them in a while. I think it really comes down to the mechanics. It has the mechanics. It has the missions. So it's close.
The theme feels so good, but it just didn't hit. And I feel like it was because of the base rules for the pirates. And I feel like also when you have a pirate crew and it's 10 guys, one of the things in Frostgrave is that your only your leaders level up, right? But it feels like if you're playing a pirate game, you want everyone to level up a bit.
You might want. So I guess we're getting closer into the mechanics thing. So I don't know. I feel like going back to the shooting part first that you were talking about. I think that is really important. That the real cool feel of pirates is just them fighting it out with their like
swashbuckling,
their swashbuckling swords and all that. So obviously give the guys like pistols and all that, but because they're not like having a war, I don't think you need to have cannons in the game. Honestly, like if they're showing up and trying to steal a ship, they're not going to blast it with cannons and sink it. They're trying to get the ship. They're not blasting the ship with cannons. Or if they're going to shore, they're not like hauling cannons to shore. Maybe they're just showing up on rowboats. But anyhow, for the shooting thing, I think it would be fine to have pistols in it because that's in people's minds what pirates are. But obviously, like from my little historical knowledge, like they didn't have like a 5 clip of shots just like firing away on each other. They had to like pull out a pistol, then they pull out another pistol, then they pull out another pistol. They weren't like packing the gunpowder in to reload and putting another thing in and packing that. Like you're not doing that in the middle of battle. And a lot of the games we play that have like that are supposed to be set in that era with like old pistols with shot in them, or like wherever the balls are. Like, oh no, you just quickly reload like this in one short order in like half your activation. It's like,
you
no.
can reload and fire in one action.
Yeah, you're like, that's not how the pace of battle goes. You're not just gonna stand there just cleaning your weapon out and like pulling out the pieces to do it. Like, no, you need to have a bunch of pistols to pull out, and that should be like an expensive unit to have all those pistols. And the shooting shouldn't be like, oh yeah, it's 50-50 to hit like across the board. It's like, no, that's not how it's gonna work. You're like on a rocking ship and they're running around. So have the pistols in there, but it's like it's not the biggest. It should be really hard to hit, be like a long time to reload. Maybe you just like fail. You have to make a roll to reload, possibly. Like just tone down the shooting, but let people have their guns for the aesthetic.
I feel like one of the mechanics or ideas. So when you think about when you want a miniature game with pirates, what do you want to happen, right? I totally agree. The idea of pulling out a pistol, shooting it is one of the dreams, right? But one of the other dreams is shooting, missing, and then being like saying, oh, screw it. Grabbing your saber, taking it out and rushing the guy, right? So shooting one guy and then taking out your saber and attacking another guy. That to me is the feeling of the pirates, right? Like you said, having the guns be useful, but running out of bullets or not being able to reload and not having the time to reload and having to rush in combat and fight in close combat. That to me is one of the things that really makes it feel, piratey, right? And like you said, the ability for a guy to have like a rifle should be rarer, right? A guy who shoots from afar and is able to hit someone. So I agree. Those two things are important for making pirates feel like, especially like we're talking about the modern pirates as opposed to the Sinbad pirates, right? Sinbad pirates is even more so about swashbuckling, right? It's mostly about swashbuckling, and there's not that much shooting because back then, you use a crossbow or a bow.
In that era, and even the musket era, like if you had an army fight another army with their muskets, it wasn't like, I shoot this one guy with my musket. You're like, no, I just point in the direction of their guys. I just shoot it and it hits somebody in this area. And it's like, that guy's gonna get shot with this musket. It's like, probably not.
Yeah, and the other thing, I guess with the Sinbad era, you think instead of actually bows, right? Because firing a bow on a rocking boat seems pretty hard. You think more about throwing daggers and things like that as weapons, especially because people are not wearing armor, right? So the idea of having to carry like an armor-piercing arrow to fight on a ship seems a lot less practical than just having knives, a knife that you use to, let's say, cut rope and things like that and use utility, and then throwing it at a guy as a ranged attack seems to fit the Sinbad era style of piracy a lot better, and often in the modern piracy as well, because of course everyone has like a blade. Most people will have a blade, right? Just because it's so useful, right, as a tool, and then using it as a weapon when the shit goes down. That is, it feels like it fits.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of whether you should have a mechanic of whether you're holding the gun or whether you're holding this, like the saber as your main weapon. I don't know. It's a possibility. If you're holding your pistol and you get attacked by someone with a saber, you're kind of screwed. Who knows?
All right. So we've talked about a whole bunch of different games, and we've talked about things that we really feel are important on making things feel piratey. At this point, can we talk about what we think is quintessential for a Pirates game at this point?
I think the missions are very critical. Like, we're talking about War Machine not feeling like a Pirates game. It's because you're just like punching each other in the face. The pirate game, like the missions have to be about the piracy. It can't be about like, oh, I killed 152 points and you only killed 132, so I win. It's like, no, that should not be any of the missions.
I feel like there are a couple of things when you think about piracy about what you do, right? So obviously one of them is grabbing the treasure and go, right? Grab the treasure and go is very much like an idea of a pirate thing.
Yes.
The other thing though is,
so it's not like pushing, like they talk about with modern games about being like pushing buttons and holding zones. It's like that's not gonna be a pirate game.
Holding the zone is not a pirate game.
And pushing the button, probably not either. You push the button, aka open the treasure chest. Yes. But after that comes the hard part.
You gotta grab it and go.
You gotta get out of there.
Yeah, definitely. Another one, piracy, is obvious. Well, not necessarily obviously, but grabbing hostages.
Yes.
So hostage exchanges going down, and then you have to grab your hostage and get away, or just there's hostages in the center. You're trying to grab them, and you're trying to
that is your own people who are somewhere.
Or capture opponents, that kind of thing. And then the final one is, which I feel like is the most like smashing each other against each other, is beating down the opponent until they surrender. I feel like that is very much still a very pirate thing, but it's a little bit different than like killing more guys than the opponent at the end of the game, right? There should be a feeling like whoever kills up to like 3 guys, right? Let's say you have 4 guys, whoever defeats 3 guys first, right? Feels more piratey than whoever has killed more guys at the end of the game, right? Like it's like you've forced them into submission as opposed to who has won the battle of attrition, right?
So on the No Decker Munda, do you need morale checks then in this game? Because your crew isn't like so ideological or like mechanically dedicated. Their will might just like give up and not follow their pirate king.
Morale checks, I feel like I think a morale check is definitely an interesting thing to put into pirate games, because when we think about pirates, you don't think of them as soldiers dedicated to their nations, of going, fighting forever, right? These guys are there for money, right? They're there, for freedom and money, and every single person is there not because they're dedicated to greater ideals. It's for themselves. And so their ability to continue fighting and put their life on the line is a lot reduced compared to someone who is a fanatic, right? And ideologically dedicated to their country. So I agree. Some sort of morale or some sort of thing of surrender or something, right?
So maybe not.
And it could even be, go on.
So maybe not everybody has a stat line. It's like, oh, I have morale 7, but this guy has morale. Oh no, maybe your rank and file guys, like your cheap hired like thugs, have a lower level, and your like more elite crew are more like ride or die with you, and your like mooks might just run off. And when you see your cheap hired guys run off, you're like, yeah, okay, we can't win now. They ran off. Let's everybody take off.
Yeah.
So
it'd be interesting.
So
definitely one of those ideas of, especially if you have multiple, like a larger crew, like you have like, let's say your dedicated pirate crew, your like captains and vice captains. Sorry, I'm thinking about One Piece. Sorry. But you said that, and then you have the other guys who are just like you said, like mooks who are just running around, and then if all your mooks run away, you basically lose.
You could win if you think you can still pull the treasure back, but you might just want to run away because too much of your crew has abandoned.
Yeah, or you're fighting over a ship, right? And whoever dominates the other opponent, gets to keep the ship, so that then, whoever loses is the one who runs off, right? Who loses more guys, who feels like they can't take it. So that's the more direct combat. But I agree. I think those are the 3 main kind of archetypes. Another one is probably escape. So that's like a asymmetric thing where one person is trying to has a bigger force and one person has a weaker force, and the weaker force is trying to escape, right? Because it's very much of a pirate thing, right? After they've raided a ship, they are trying to escape, and then the
authorities come after you.
And you're trying to escape with your booty. That is, I feel like, a very much a piratey, quintessential pirate mission.
Yeah, so in a 2-player game, maybe you just have like each player controls half of the authorities. So obviously you're not going to chase yourself down with the authorities. Like the authorities are tasked with like
that is fun.
Some of the authorities are tasked with getting this pirate leader, and these authorities are tasked with getting that pirate leader. They're like, yeah, I don't care what you're doing over here. Yeah, we're part of the same group, but yeah, I have a different like task.
And you're trying to grab the treasure and run off while the authorities are swarming. That's exactly what happens in like every pirate movie, right? You have the good pirates and the bad pirates, and they're fighting over the treasure, and then another third party, which is usually the empire that they're in, so generally like British or Spanish or whatever, they're coming in and trying to arrest everyone, right?
Yeah,
and then
or like you're both on the board, you were going to have a pirate meeting to exchange stuff, and the authorities like swarm you from both sides. And you're like, well, we could actually attack each other during this, or we could try to get out alive.
Yeah, there's so much fun that you could do in that kind of thing. I agree. That is very much the missions add so much to the theme and the fun of that. In terms of the things that we've mentioned already and other mechanics, I think we mentioned the two main things in terms of weapons and fighting is swashbuckling and guns, right? And the guns need to be not dominating. Swashbuckling should be more efficient, but guns need to have some sort of benefit, generally, of the fact that you can fire at them from across the board, right? So, but they need to feel like they're powerful, but they need to reload. So you need to have a feeling like it's slow. They're not optimal guns. So the idea of having a guy who is only swashbuckling should feel a viable alternative, in some ways better in general than just a guy with only guns, right? So if you were to choose one, it should be swashbuckling. But if you can have both, or you have a particular one or two guys who are able to use guns, it makes it feel, and I'm not talking about skirmish, right? Makes it feel correct, right? The idea of having to reload and take a long time, or the idea of having 4 guns, so you don't have to reload, should feel awesome, right?
So which brings us to like how your guys like have inventory possibly and how they level up. Like I think they should have basically maybe your mooks more level up by just getting more stuff, because that feels very piratey to just be like, yeah, I have all these cool things I've gathered because I've gone pirating and stealing things.
Yeah, so just nicer guns, better master crafted swords.
So rather than just changing your stat lines, like, oh, he went up by 1 this game or this, it's like, okay, yeah, his stat line changed, but it's because he has like a gold emblazoned pistol he stole from some governor. It's like, yeah,
he's got an awesome feathered hat, so everyone respects him more, and he gives everyone a -1 morale to negative, so they're more likely to run away, right? Yeah, definitely. The idea of the equipment making your guys better is an interesting thing to definitely improve, to make your guys feel more piratey.
Yeah,
right?
rather than
just as opposed to
buying better
pure stat buffs and things like that in crew, for sure. Like if you're doing that kind of campaign kind of play, the only issue is with that kind of thing is because pirates is relatively recent in terms of historical time period. The ability to have, but not recent enough to have super advanced differences in equipment. There is some feeling that it might be harder to differentiate the weapons and the quality of weapons, right? Like if you have more money, are you just like, what's the difference between a pistol and a mastercrafted, flintlock pistol, and how would you do that kind of thing and make it interesting to have a bunch of different weapons? So that you would need to buy, as opposed to everyone can start with whatever, right? So there is some worry about being able to do that, even though I do feel like it's very thematic, and I think that's one of the things that I liked about Ghost Archipelago, Frostgrave, Ghost Archipelago, and the Sinbad era, because it's so far back in the past, and because you can add I feel like it's easier to add in a lot of fantasy, right? And a lot of magic and a lot of like equipment that is just better and superior in a lot of different ways, because during that time, if you had a flintlock in that time period, okay, it would kind of suck because no one has gunpowder, but you know the idea I'm talking about, right? A flintlock piece of equipment in that period of time, it would feel awesome. Or like a master crafted crossbow during that period of time. You could make huge differences in what these beautiful pieces of machinery would do. Sorry, there's a
truck and your windows open?
It's not a truck. It's an airplane, because it is, the air show is going on.
Well, then that's harder to control than even trucks.
Yeah, it's not above my place. It's just very loud.
Yep. So thinking, I can't remember Ghost Archipelago as much, but obviously in Rangers of Shadow Deep, which is less piratey, but like events happen throughout the game all the time. Is that the case for Ghost Archipelago?
Yes. Okay. It's like Frostgrave, right? So, yes. Oh no, not events happening every once in a while, but like monsters will show up and things will happen, and every mission can have weird stuff. Just like, it's a Joe McCullough game, right? So the missions are very thematic and fun, and crazy stuff happens, right? But it's not like it's secret, like in Rangers of Shadow Deep.
So I feel like crazy shit happening during a pirate game should be a thing. Like, you're not a well-formed military. You don't have like good intel. You're just going in there and you're going to see what happens. So, now I've got the airplanes on my end too. Yeah. They've made it across the whole city to me. Yep. Anyhow, that's what happens when you travel at supersonic speeds. I'm like traveling at like whatever knots. So I think having those events.
When they're airplanes, okay, I get it. You're being piratey.
Traveling at very high knots, which is not how you measure.
Yes, in the sky. Got it.
But yeah, I think having events would also contribute to the feel of it being like a less controlled piratey mission, and possibly like if you're doing a campaign thing, have like a level of notoriety, and as sort of like a balance mechanic. So okay, you have a better pirate crew than your opponent, but that makes you more notorious, which makes it more likely that bad shit happens to you during the game, because the authorities are way more pissed off at you. So there's more likelihood that like bigger bad guys, better armed bad guys show up, that possibly like worse events happen. But it probably makes more sense, just like you're more notorious, so they're more likely to have big bad guys show up.
And when bad guys show up, they'll target the guy who is higher notoriety, whose bounty is higher, right? That's a big thing in One Piece. Everyone has bounties, and the pirates basically rate each other based on how big their bounties are. They're like, oh, this guy's cool. Look how high their bounty is. So yeah, even though the bounty is literally saying, the government is like, yeah, dead or alive, we'll give you this much money if you can capture this guy.
Yeah. So I think that's having the authorities show up during the game, and if it's a campaign, having it be influenced by your notoriety as like a nice balancing mechanic. I think that would fit really well.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent thing, actually. So with the in terms of, I guess we talked about the guns a bunch, but we didn't really talk about what swashbuckling means. So we did a little bit as the idea of hit and run, but what makes, combat swashbuckling versus knights fighting versus martial artists, in combat? What does swashbuckling actually mean?
Because you stab the guy, and it's not like you don't decapitate him, but you stabbed him. It's like, shouldn't fight on any longer. This is bad. So maybe they have to, if they're hit, they have to retreat a bit, because they're not just going to keep pressing forwards, because they're not crazy like an armored knight who's like, you landed a bit of a blow, but I've covered in chainmail and all that. You do a bit of a poke to a pirate. It might not be deadly, but they're like, oh shit, I'm bleeding. Better get the heck out of here and not bleed to death.
Yeah, the idea of slashing them so that their arm is bleeding, and so they back up. And the quintessential, in my opinion, swashbuckling scenario or scene is the swords cross and they're pushing back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. And then one guy pushes the opponent into a corner, and now they have advantage, right? When they're pushed into the corner. That kind of back and forth and movement, or pushing the guy, like in the movies, they push the guy and the guy rolls out of the through the gate or down the stairs, right? Mm-hmm. And falls down, and then the guy jumps down to chase after him. That kind of feeling feels like the swashbuckling thing you think about, right? Or grabbing a rope and like swinging to another part of the ship, right? And in the movies, they always like grab the rope, and then for some reason, clang clang, 3 people as they swing around. That kind of thing to me is the swashbuckling thing. Yes, and they end up kicking a guy at the end, and the guy goes over the water and falls into the water. That is swashbuckling. Yeah, so high movement pushing.
Mm-hmm. If you've been like already hit and you're like on the fall, you're falling back, they can do those crazy kickback moves to you because you're not in fighting state. So I'm just thinking back to Necromunda again, which how they implemented it, where you get hit and fall down is kind of awful, and you stand back up and you shoot and you fall down. You stand up and you shoot again.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a pirate.
The whole thing about having to do the check to see if you just like bleed to death because you've been hit, or if you're like, oh, you like wrap it up and you're like, oh, I'm good to go again, or like, oh, that was actually not that bad as I thought. Uh-huh. Like having like 1 in 6 you fall over dead, 1 in 6 you're okay, 2 out of 3 or 2/3 you just keep having to back away. Having that
feels piratey. Yeah,
feels piratey. Falling over and just being like, oh, I'm crawling around. You're like, that's Necromunda, I guess.
Yeah.
But in a pirate game, I think implementing that, but in the falling back way is cool. Mm-hmm. And that'd be different than morale. Like morale, you just like.
Yeah, everyone runs away. That's more of like if you fail your morale check, everyone just runs away and that's the end of the game.
Versus
right?
being in fighting states.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I feel like that is maybe one of the difference between bandits and pirates when you think about their combat. Even though they're crossing swords, right? The idea of getting pushed around is not really what you think about in terms of bandits, but it's definitely what you imagine in terms of the pirate mystique and theme. And I have no idea why that is the main, I don't know, the mystique of pirate combat. Maybe is it just the time period that it happened? It must be, right? Because Musketeers has the same kind of feeling of like crossing swords, because it's the same time period, right? Mm-hmm. Roughly. So you have that, swashbuckling kind of feeling. It's just, so during that time period, I guess because once guns became popular enough that only super heavy armor works, but it's not good enough that you don't also use swords. It made, running around with light armor or almost no armor and swords become a very important thing to do in combat. And suddenly, maybe that's why during that time period, that swashbuckling type of fighting became so popular. Also fencing, I feel like that's when fencing became really, really popular. So maybe it's also the sword technology.
And also, if you're a pirate, you're not out to murder as many people as possible, because then they'll just want to find you and hang you. You're like, well, if we just stole the stuff, they're not going to come to just shoot us all dead immediately. They can possibly negotiate with us versus. So I think that maybe if you're in that falling back state, you can just be kicked off the boat or kicked off the pier almost really easily. So rather than just it being about removing people through just stabbing them to death, like your crazy murder hobos in D&D, it's more just about driving them off and then being able to get where you want to go, or just throw them in the water to
That's
the point
a good point.
It takes forever for them to crawl back if they ever do.
I do feel like pirates, or the pirate, you could say it's probably actually also kind of historical, but the pirate mystique is low lethality. Mm-hmm. Because, like we said, pirates themselves don't want to kill people. The more people they kill, the more whatever, the more heat they get, right? From the more people want to find and chase them down. They're really just about stealing, making money. So risking their own lives is much less important. So the entire even though everyone is not running around in, armor, it feels like part of it is because they're much less likely to want to go and kill each other, and that in turns makes the combat almost feel more, what do you call it, more adventure-y and more, even though pirates were not good people, a bunch of thieves and stuff like that, it felt like less bloody and gruesome than, let's say, Necromunda, which is modeled after, this dark and gritty warfare. And of course, there's a lot of, the idea of piracy is enhanced because of the romanticism of the pirate age, which is obviously almost certainly, not accurate.
Yeah. But you're playing a game. Like, you got to lean into it for a game.
Exactly. But that's the thing. Like, that is the mystique and the feeling of pirates and what people want from piracy. So even if that portion is not necessarily as accurate relative to other bandits during the time period, that kind of play feels like is what people would want, right, when they play.
So I think into the campaign and possibly the in-game element, maybe your notoriety, rather than counting it up after the game, should just be going up during the game. And if you kill other pirates, like, your notoriety in the game increases, so the enemies become more likely to start attacking you versus your opponent. Or if you just stab, rather than just driving back the authorities, you just plunge a sword through them. Now the authorities are more pissed off at you than your opponent, so they'll start attacking you more. So you're kind of maybe I shouldn't just stab the guy while he's on the ground. Otherwise, the authorities will start attacking me versus my opponent. They can run off with the treasure. And at the end of the game, possibly if you're doing campaign, you've got your power level. This is your amount of bling on you, which obviously attracts the authorities' attention because you're just you're rich and blinged out. Also, you add that score from your murder level or your group, whatever you want to call it, your lawlessness level during the game. You add that to your, not the actual value, quality of your warband, but your notoriety. You add those two scores together, and then you gain that level you're at to see how much the opponents dislike you and how the events in the game that may become unfavorable to you because of that difference of you and your opponent.
So I feel we talked about a bunch, and you really the whole campaign thing. I feel like you're very that is a thing that you really like and are focusing on. Do you feel like pirates and the life of a pirate, as opposed to a one-off conflict versus a campaign kind of play, do you think pirates lean into the idea of campaign play? Because the idea is, the idea of a pirate's life is very short. It's supposed to be short, but the idea of, having a campaign almost feels like it lends itself directly to what pirates were doing, right? Because unlike if you're part of a nation's combat, it feels like, the nation goes on forever, right? So it's every single day you're showing up and then you eventually retire. Whereas a pirate feels like they have a very set goal of what they want to do. They want to go steal a bunch of money, get rich, and then retire, right?
Yep.
That is the goal. Retire in another, running away into another place where they can start a new life being rich, right? So it feels like it lends itself to a campaign style of play where you're trying to build up your resources, build up your money, and then in the end retire.
Yeah, absolutely. You're comparing how good of a pirate am I versus the other pirate captain. Am I the pirate king, or does that other guy clearly have way more booty than I do?
And the idea of retiring is in some ways is great for almost like a perennial campaign, where if a guy, if you can balance it out, right, with the enemies coming on, you could even have it so that if your pirate crew gets too powerful, they just retire, right? They have a certain amount of money, they can retire, and you start a new crew, and your opponent maybe is not there yet, so they suddenly become the stronger crew, right? And now you're the upstart pirate doing these kind of things, trying as things go on. It would be an interesting way, especially if the game is made to be multiplayer. Well, they're all multiplayer, right? But more than 2 players, right? 3 players is self-balancing, and it can work a lot better with crews, weaker crews, stronger crews, right? And having this entire campaign where, maybe everyone ends right after a certain period of time, but you can see how many people retired, who came back, which new crew, star crew. It would be a fun campaign kind of play that fits directly into the ideals and the imagination of what people think of pirates.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that brings us to one last thing at the very least, is what we started with, is the boat question.
Boats. So there's a lot of issues with boats and pirates. The main issue is you have to make a boat.
You have to carry a boat around. Yeah.
Yes.
You have a real boat for the game store.
It's really hard. And it looks so good when you have a nice boat on the table. If you're playing a pirate thing in a dock, but it is so much work.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the both strengths and weaknesses of Blood and Plunder, because when you buy that starter set, I got 2 sloops, right, which are decent sized boats, but they're big, right? They're not even like the big. It's not like a galleon. Okay, a galleon's crazy, but it's not even a big. They're not big boats, right? But they're still so big. I'm like, how am I supposed to carry that around?
Over a foot long with the extra little piece on the front.
Okay, I gotta go.
I'm sure that piece has a name, but I don't know that much with boats. The part that's on the bow.
I assembled mine.
Yeah, holy shit! The piece that sticks out the front's enormous. Yeah, the front piece is literally like 8 inches long.
That's the boat.
That's not even the whole boat.
It's
the extra,
really big. It's
a stick.
It's not quite wider than me, but it's really close.
Yeah.
Is it wider? No, it's not quite wider than me. The angle makes it look a little bit wider than me, but it's not wider than me.
Yeah. So that's going too far. Maybe
it's not going too far. It's amazing, and when you have it, you're like, oh, now that I assembled it, right, and I'm starting to paint it, I'm like, oh, I have to put up the sails. Of course, I'm going to put sails on. Yeah. So it's going to look awesome, but it is a huge lift.
You're like, that's a quarter of a Blood and Plunder army. That's not even the guys that go on that boat. Anyhow.
The boats are actually
bigger.
The base boat is actually cheap. It's like putting all of the equipment onto the boat that makes it expensive.
Yeah. Anyways.
And the crew.
Yeah. Anyways.
That's just Blood and Plunder gameplay rules, though. Yeah. But the idea of that being assembled, that to me is the hardest part, and I feel like that's one of the things that makes pirates hard to do on the tabletop. You have to be really dedicated because the ship is such an important part of the aesthetic of pirates. And even if you're always doing on board, like you're always raiding docks and things like that, and raiding port towns, every once in a while you want your pirate ship to be in the background, even if there's no rules for moving around and there's no on ocean combat, because you are a bunch of pirates are raiders, right? So they sail in, they jump off, they grab shit and go, right? Even if you're not doing the boarding a merchant ship, right, you still want those pirate things, and it's just hard to do.
So you could have it as just like a background thing as like your base and all that, and if people want to model it and have it at home and like take pictures of it with all your booty and upgrades, you can let people have that outlet. But putting it into the main game of a skirmish game would make it so inaccessible.
It's hard, or at least you need to have it as optional. Yeah, it needs to be an optional thing. The one thing that is interesting, and I think is of having ships, is boarding combat, right? Because when someone does, rowboats and combat, rowboats and ships on the water fighting, right? That is a quintessential pirate battle, right? Where they've been boarded, they've been locked together, and now these two, everyone's jumping on and boarding, right? That fight is super, it would be a great mission that you can do if you can set that thing up. But your game has to be able to deal with such a small space, because a normal miniatures game is a lot bigger, right? 24 by 24 or 36 by 36. And suddenly, if you have 2 ships, like we said, how big are your ships going to be if you want that battle, right? Are you going to say, oh, to play with the sporting game battle, you need a 2-foot 28 millimeter ship, right? You need some sort of galleon to actually play this mission. Then no one's going to play that mission, right? Unless they are not actually modeled. The terrain is not modeled, and it's just a map, right, that you print out and play. Which again, it becomes more like a board game feel, right? People would rather have it, and maybe that's fine, right?
Yeah, you have a bunch of tiles, basically.
Yeah, to make
the same thing. If you're fighting on docks, your docks aren't like 2 foot by 3 feet. The docks are thin, and like you said, the mechanics are going to have to lean into this too, which we sort of talked about. But the game might lend itself towards having a bunch of tiles to create the docks, to create the ships in some sort of way that is practical, and you can put in a box after, you can show up at the game store. Yeah. So I'm feeling like this game might have a lot of maybe 6x6 tiles, possibly.
That's an interesting point. 6x6 tiles and a much smaller footprint. I feel like a pirate game, like you're saying, right? Instead of having a 36x36 game where everyone's running around, just make the gameplay and the mechanics much smaller, right? Maybe it's only a 24, or even smaller. Maybe it's like a 12x18, right? If it's 6x6 tiles, and you're playing on that board, and then you make the mechanics in a way that it works.
Yep. And maybe you show up, if you have the docks, maybe you have your rowboats as kind of your deployment and your exit pieces as an option for shore things.
Yeah.
Or you just have tiles, the boats have come next to each other and you put the tiles next to each other, and there's some sort of mechanic of when you break away or things like that. Or you're both pirates attack the Imperial ship at the same time, they flank it.
Yeah.
But then you're like, oh yeah, we plan to attack it together, but in reality, I'm taking the gold as Ruby Scepter.
Yeah,
you're like, whoa, man, you're not taking the Ruby Scepter. The Ruby Scepter's mine. That's not what we agreed on.
And then they're fighting. And that is
fighting, and you're fighting the enemies, but you've flanked the middle boat, the Imperial vessel.
Yeah. So I feel like there is definitely a thing. The spaces thing, there is some compromise in doing that, right? Because we all, as miniature gamers, want a fully modeled board. But the idea of having, miniatures, the miniatures are still, generally the centerpieces. So maybe the board is not fully modeled, but with the miniatures running around, that could be enough to keep the game interesting and fun and playable, most important, right?
So, you've made out of just popsicle sticks, lots of just wooden gangways, plankways.
Yeah.
You could put out STLs for people if they love their 3D printing. Because it's honestly a really low layer height to just print a thin tile thing. If you wanted to go overboard, be like, oh, here's the version of the STL with the side railings of the boat. So now the tile is half an inch thick. So you can have a kind of a cube of tiles to play your game with. Or even have little nubs on the bottom to make the dock a bit raised. Just if people want to go a little bit further than just having their paper tiles, they want to start modeling things. You can make a whole bunch of basically a 6x6 cube. It is your whole game worth of tiles to play every mission. And
that's definitely an interesting point. Yeah,
because it's not a hard hobby thing to do. You get a bunch of stir sticks and popsicle sticks, you just cut them into 6-inch lengths and start gluing them together, and you got cool looking stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely an idea, actually, to make it more playable, because it is true. When you have the boats, and I have these, Blood and Plunder boats, I definitely, designing the the one box game around this pirate ship, but having them as spaces works, makes it so much more accessible. Having that paper where you can just print it out and play on it definitely will work. All right.
Yeah, maybe I guess half tiles and whole tiles. I'm just thinking because if you have a regular sized piece of paper, you can't get 2 6x6s out of that, which I feel like is a waste of paper. So maybe there's whole tiles and half tiles, so you can get one.
It depends on your size. If you're also doing your own spaces, right? You could make them any size you want, right? If you want to make it practical, maybe it's 4x4, right? Depending on your game, right? Each space is 4x4, and depending on how big your game is, right? It might work, right? 6x6 is more if you want to be able to build at a larger board, right? But 4x4 depending on the game.
It's more flexible.
Yeah. All right. So that leads to the last thing. So I just mentioned it casually. I mentioned it, I think, before, but I've been working on a game, the pirate game, with all of these ideas that we were talking about for a one box miniature game challenge. And I chose pirates because I've been assembling Blood and Plunder, right? And so I've put in a lot of these ideas. And if you are interested in that kind of thing, you can go check it out on the Discord for Rules of Carnage. There's so many games, right, of all these different things. My game is called Buccaneer's Bluff, and that is what I want to talk about. The last thing is bluffing as a mechanic. Now, I feel like this goes back into the swashbuckling kind of idea, but there is a feeling of pirates being tricky. And this is like all the things we talked about before are the things that really make a pirate game feel like a pirate game. And I think that's what you need, right? But one thing that I really like or wanted to put in or want to put into a pirate game, and I think I mentioned this a bunch of times when we talked about it, is a bluffing mechanic, right? Because pirates are supposed to be tricky. They all do sorts of things. They hide things, right? And one of the most, I guess, interesting things, especially because, we play miniature games, dice games, is Liar's Dice. Have you ever played Liar's Dice?
Nope.
Oh, it's basically a drinking game, at least the way I played it, right? It's a drinking game. Well, I have played it. It's a drinking game. It's basically where you roll a bunch of dice and you hide it in your cup, and everyone does that, and you basically go around trying to guess the number of dice in your the number of dice in everyone's cup. So you say a number of dice and a face value, and you make a bid basically of that value, and then the opponents can either call your bluff or they can raise it, right? So you have this great kind of thing, and it was actually, I don't know why it was. Well, it was apparently created in the New World, and it was imported into Europe by the conquistadors, which is maybe why it kind of has some sort of piratey feel. And poker is a cowboy thing, but like dice feels like a pirate's thing, right? Gambling and kind of stuff like that, because dice don't get, if they get wet, they're okay, I guess. So it was this Liar's Dice thing so popular. It was actually in Pirates of the Caribbean. Do you remember this? It was actually one of the important scenes where they play Liar's Dice as a dramatic thing, bidding over the soul of, I think, one of the main characters. You don't remember this at all?
Is this one of the later movies?
It is. It's not the first one. I think it's the second or third one, which is maybe why you don't remember them.
Probably the third, because I watched the first two.
Okay. Well,
the second wasn't very good.
I gotta say, it was kind of terrible. But there's some great scenes in it. But that idea, that gameplay is so fun. And I feel like I personally kept on talking to you about when we talked about a Pirates game, saying you need to cram in this kind of idea of bluffing and somehow working it in.
So I think you've explained to me how it should fit into the game now. So you said in the Pirates of the Caribbean, they're playing for the souls of one of the characters, right?
Yeah.
And I know we did like a test of trying to do it for every interaction, but that whole thing about it, the game being for the souls of the players, I think that if your guys go down during the game, if you want to save them from death, you must win the game of Liar's Dice. Otherwise, the authorities hang them. That's why you have to bluff your way out of it. Like, if you don't bluff your way through this, oh no, the guy's a good guy. The guy's a good guy. Don't worry, I got all these good things under my cup. Just let him go. I got good things for you. And you fail, the guy loses his. They're either just rolling one dice and be oh, he lives, he dies. You're no, you must play the game for all the souls of your guys who go down during the game and campaign. That's actually epic. Rather than be like, oh, we gotta go through this whole thing during the middle of the game, and like, oh, I'll do this every time.
I love it. I love the mechanic of doing it every single time. Oh, it is because you're bad at bluffing.
Yeah, whatever.
That's the entire core of the game. So Liar's Dice, in and of itself, is a game by itself. Right? So the idea of using it as a
mini game
resolution mechanic
felt like a mini game.
It is. Mm-hmm. It is somewhat of a mini game.
It is a mini game. Yeah, exactly.
And it's a bluffing mini game.
Yeah, but that's why it should only occur like periodically.
No, I disagree. Like mini games. Putting your game around the interesting mechanic resolution, like there is no reason why rolling dice just straight up should be your main resolution for your gameplay, right? Like there's, besides the fact that that's what we want, right? That's what we're used to, right? That's why, certain games have card game mechanics, right? Like why, Malifaux has a card flipping mechanic, right? With a bluffing, cheating kind of mechanic where you can insert cards from your hand, right? But when you look at the wider array of games, like especially board games, right? These board games and miniature games, miniature games are basically just a type of board game, right? With beautiful, like, especially nowadays when you look at certain board games that get super blinged out with super beautiful boards and fully modeled kind of stuff. There is, or you look at dungeon crawlers, which are board games, right? But they could also be classified as miniature games. The idea of being just having your resolution mechanic being rolling dice and doing that kind of thing it's definitely a way to play and an interesting kind of thing. But having a different resolution mechanic, as long as the resolution mechanic is interesting to the people, it gives a different kind of feeling to the game. And you're right in terms of, maybe it's not for everyone, but to me, I feel like having that thing as the core, I feel like having it outside and just the resolution of, let's say, the guy's dying, feels like it turns it into a mini game, as in a separate from the actual game. Whereas when you just make it every single resolution, it makes it a core part. It makes it the core resolution mechanic of the game. It becomes the game. It's not a mini game anymore. It is the game.
So I think then it has to be really impactful, because I guess a round of it or a whole game of it takes a while. So possibly, like, because I guess you do a bunch of rounds of bluffing during Liar's Dice.
It's a drinking game. It's not actually that. It doesn't take that long. So, Liar's Dice, it's like a minute, basically, or something. It's a drinking game. It takes about a minute to go through a round.
Yeah, so if you're going to spend a minute in the game, you want something to happen, like more than just doing like one wound. If the guy has like 5 wounds, and you have to spend 1 minute to take 1 wound off of 5,
sure,
that's probably not right. But if, say, for
you want a certain amount, yeah. You could also reduce the number of wounds, right? Yeah. 5 wounds and you reduce 1 is 1/5 of their life. Yeah, I feel like that's a lot.
So possibly for maybe if the guys did have 5 wounds, for every round you give up and let your opponent have, he takes a wound. So you go back and forth.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
But if you like
every resolution they lose a wound or 1 or more wounds. Yeah.
Yeah, if you let them have it that round, you're like, oh, okay. You take a wound, then I take a wound, then you take a wound, I take a wound. And then, like, which is why you may want, like, no, you're bluffing so you don't take any more wounds.
Yeah. You need to have a tight loop there, right? Yeah, go on.
Yeah. That in the case of, like, your guy can go down completely in that course of one game of Liar's Dice, because you're spending a whole minute. Like, if you spent a minute of a game, there should be a potential for someone to go down.
Yeah.
And it'd be difficult for them to get back up. So I think as long as it worked that way, that you're spending that minute, but the impact of that minute of playing that game, like, is very impactful.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot that goes around. If you make it the center of the game, your game has to center around that bluffing mechanic, and you're not going to have the tight position. You don't want to have too much going on outside of that interaction. That interaction should be resolving that interaction should be the major impact for the game, right? So making it so that movement, positioning matters, trying to like angle people around. If you put in something like that heavy, right, as the main mechanic, I agree. I think that the other parts need to be easier. And that's why in the design of the game is played like in Buccaneer's Bluff, the one I'm working on, is the movement is very simple, right? One of the things that is that the gameplay is played in spaces, right? So, and the base game, there are 3 spaces.
You're on the one boat, not multiple boats,
yeah,
not a dog, not a boat with a dock, just the boat.
Just the one boat. So there's 3 spaces. There's the center of the board, and then there's your 2 spaces. And the way that the game plays means that there's not a huge, there's not positioning, angling, and stuff like that. You're not fiddling with that kind of stuff. And in many ways, the way I designed it is, in many ways, it's a board game, right? You could actually play it as a board game as opposed to miniature. But of course, miniature games look cooler, right? So that kind of way is how I'm kind of designing that game, with that kind of, pushing and trying to defeat the people, right? So I think the previous iterations, or the ways that we were thinking about it before when I was thinking about pirate games, was to have a more normal pirate game. And then I wanted to put the bluffing mechanic on top, right? The liar's dice mechanic on top. And I don't think it worked because, like you said, it felt like it was taking you out of the main flow of the game. But by making it the main game, like the actual game and how every resolution mechanic happens, it felt fully integrated. But like you said, all the other things had to be simplified to have this portion as the main resolution.
So that sort of back and forth thing feels like the squash-buckling sword fight thing. But if somebody pulls out like their little pistol and goes like bang, you're not like, okay, we're gonna go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I think that works for sword fighting as a resolution mechanic, but not for, it doesn't feel right for like just shooting.
For shooting.
Sword fighting, you're feinting, you're going back and forth, but shooting, you're just like, and you're like, gotta reload maybe.
Dodging out of the way of the bullet. I think that is somewhat true, that it doesn't feel as fitting, but I don't necessarily think if you put it in as swashbuckling, I would agree with you that it doesn't feel as close, but I wouldn't. The way that it's set up right now, it doesn't make sense to have the shooting be not that as the resolution mechanic, because you want it to be the same kind of resolution mechanic all the way through, and you want there to be bluffing as well with the shooting as well. Otherwise, the shooting feels boring relative to the swashbuckling. And so you don't get that feeling of, shooting is a viable thing as swashbuckling and things like that. So what do you think about putting other what about other bluffing ways that you would put into, let's say this is the game that I've been working on in terms of a more campaign, whatever kind of game that we talked about before. Is there other bluffing mechanics you would want to put in that feels like that adds that swashbuckling in? Would you do it even simpler, where it's literally just you do rolls? I guess for you it'd be like you do your roll to fight, right, like a normal game, right? And you could also just have hidden dice that you could maybe once per round you could spend it, or maybe you could spend it multiple times per round, but you could just add it to your dice, and you could also lie. So you do your normal roll, and then let's say you have 1 or 2 dice hidden, right? Instead of like for liar's dice, most of them are hidden. You go back and forth to bid and outbid. You just, when you attack, the attacker says, I have this number. The opponent says, I have this number. And then you're either lying or you're not to make your attack roll happen. So it's a lot simpler. It's 2 bluffs, right? So you roll, let's say you're attacking, right? I roll 2 dice, and then I have 2 hidden dice.
If your dice screen. Mm-hmm.
I roll 2 dice, I have 2 dice, and I say, this is my number. The opponent then makes a counter number, and either of them can say bluff or real. And you get a bonus if you called the bluff. If I called the bluff on you and you actually had it, then you get a bonus.
That otherwise resolves much faster, kind of like that. And you don't need as many dice. Like trying to do 5 dice and hide 5 dice all at once is difficult. If you have sort of a dice, I guess the board is small. Like in big games, we have to go to the other side of the board. You're like, oh, how do we hide our dice from each other? But in a smaller scale game, you don't have to like move around the board. You can just reach your hand across. You can't have a dice screen there. So if you have 2 behind, 2 in front, and if you cause like extra effects or extra whatever through the bluff, that's one way. The other way, like how gambling is often done, is just with cards. You have your hand of cards.
Cards don't make sense for dice.
No, it's a miniatures game. I like the dice. Yeah. So you're having the dice screen.
Cards get soggy, so they don't have cards in pirate ships.
It's true. When it rains, it just comes through everywhere. Popular.
Yeah, that's why the cards I feel like are more of a cowboy thing, because everything is dry. So
it's in the desert.
People's cards last longer. Yeah.
Cowboy games, cards,
dice
on the sea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a screen, because rolling things under the cup, like smashing the cup around, was always like, I don't know. But if there's only 2, that's good for 5.
Yeah.
But having a screen, it's just like you roll your dice behind the screen.
Oh, you roll behind the screen? No, cup is not. The dice cup is more fun. Even if you roll it, even if you're only rolling 2 dice, putting it into a cup is a lot easier. Shaking it around a cup, as opposed to rolling it behind a screen, because you're also going to knock the screen. There's all sorts of issues with that. Whereas the cup itself holds everything together. Yeah. The cup, and it's fun to like lift up the cup and look at your dice and put it down. That kind of feeling is fun. So even if you have 2 dice, like 2 dice that you see, 2 dice hidden, and then you just bluff or not about how many you have, it'd be more fun.
Oh, look, I have more hits than you. Like you're rolling for numbers of hits, and you're like, I rolled 2 successes here, and the other guy rolls 1. He's like, I have 2
I think
successes.
You do pairs. So no, you do it number of dice with the same face value.
So like highest versus number of pairs.
So number of dice of 1 face value.
So one
I have
person,
2 2s, and
so
then
who has,
yeah.
So who has to declare first, the attacker or defender, to claim what they have? The attacker, obviously, right?
Yeah, it's the attacker. Yeah.
The attacker claims some like, oh, I just have 1 6, and the other guy has like a 3 and a 5. He's like 2 3s, and then the attacker has to either like accept it and lose a wound, or call the bluff and then do like double maybe, or like cause some status effect in addition.
Yeah, actually, the way that I'm doing right now is that each face value gives an ability. So 1 2 gives you a bonus. 3 4 gives you a bonus. 5 6 gives you a different bonus. Right. So there's 3 different bonuses. So you actually, depending on what you want to do, you want to win using one of those numbers.
Yeah. So I think having fewer, like, don't play full on liar's dice, but play like a modified, smaller version of it. Will let the game like be snappier.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. Just
like a one round of liar's.
One round liar's dice.
Yep. And rolling pairs of dice is very common in games. Like everyone knows rolling a pair of dice is pretty common.
I will. Yeah, I think it's worth definitely a try to see how it goes, to see if it works.
You roll your cup dice first, and then you roll in front of each other and be like, and the attacker claims what they got, and the defender, if they don't want to die, is like, I got triple 2. Can't beat that, can you? Because what you claimed. And like, but if you get bonuses.
Technically, when you go and do it, like if you keep on going around, it's only 2 guys. You having 4 calls is not a big deal.
Oh yeah, but
in my opinion,
if you just have one round of it, you don't have to remember track anything.
If it's 1, 2, 3, so starting bid, opponent bid, then opponent bid, then counter bid, and that's it, and then bluff. I guess it also depends on who you want to have advantage, right?
So attacker gets to make a counter bid?
Attacker gets 2 bids, defender gets 1 bid.
So I'm just trying to think of like how you would like play it out as the attacker, like what your tactic is. Like when you would claim to have something weaker than you really have on those 4 dice. Maybe you want to win on one particular outcome, so you claim like 5, but really you have a pair of 4s, and so they claim their pair of 2s, and they're like, oh, I actually have a pair of 4s.
Yeah. So you're going back. This is actually part of how the game works. It's just there's a lot more dice.
I know.
So I think
you got to be pared down to make the interaction like achievable in like a couple seconds, in like 10 seconds. Like I claim this, I claim this. I claim this. What do you want? Or you call? So you just go.
When you play it more, like, so I was playing with a couple of guys, and when you've played Liar's Dice before, right? You need to play it a couple of times to understand what the bluffing is, but it goes a lot faster, right? Once you understand the bluffing mechanic, right? So we were calling things by the end of the game, right? The game went on a bit long because I hadn't like tuned the things, but the ability to quickly call was a lot faster, right?
Yeah. So I think if you played the longer version, just doing like a wound every time, the guys have like D6 wounds because you're playing with D6s.
The game right now, everyone has 2 wounds.
Yeah. But if
everyone has 2 wounds, there's 3 guys, and you go back and forth.
If you got wounded every round, you go back and forth. It's like Anyways, or you can block it by just calling the bluff.
Yeah, no, that's so what happens, right?
If you take a wound every time, go back and forth.
Well, if you don't defend it, then you take a wound, right?
Mm-hmm.
But everyone only has 2 life, and so it's actually when you only have 3 guys, 2 or 3 guys, the game should resolve relatively quickly, right?
If you're because it's only 6 rounds of it to take out a whole force. What? If you have 3 guys, 2 wounds each. That's 6 wounds.
Well, they don't. Right now, there's a thing of they have when you hit them and they have 0 life, you have to hit them one more time. So it's effectively 3 wounds. But the 3 wounds actually have a 4-and-up save. So the 3rd wound is not guaranteed. Mm-hmm. So effectively, you probably end up equivalent of 5 wounds, but possibly equivalent of around 4 or 5 wounds, but possibly short less, right? Because if a guy hits you with a double success, right, which is one of the bonuses, and you've lost your 2 wounds, that's 75% chance of dying, right? Because you roll 2 dice, and a 4-and-up will kill you.
Mm-hmm. So on a game of that scale with like 2 or 3 guys, that's that's the exact right way to do it. But if you were to build like a more larger skirmishy like crew feeling game, I think it would need to get like some modified version of the game. Like the real Liar's Dice game works well with like 2 or 3 guys and that number of wounds. But if you start like upping the scale, like obviously the scale, like as you said, it's just played on that one boat. If you start upping the scale to feel like a skirmish game on some sort of like 2x3, 3x3 with like crews,
you have like 10 pirates.
Yeah.
Like 10 each. In 10 each, at that point, you almost want your mooks to have 1 life, right? If they lose 1, they're gone. And then your greater guys could have 2 life or something like that, or 3 life, right? Because now you have, when a guy dies, you're like, oh, well, that guy was not important, so he can die, right? But this guy, oh, he's more important. He has an important gun, or he's trying to get away, right? Then you don't want to ever lose that. Then you might do that kind of thing. So
yeah, I'm just trying to think of how fighting the NPCs works, because it's kind of weird when your opponent makes the attack for the NPCs. I don't know. All sorts of things to think about.
You could, yeah, there's all sorts of different things.
Because if you had the version we talked about with 2 dice seen, 2 dice not seen, you could make the roll of the unseen dice for the NPC, and then your opponent makes the open roll. Nobody knows. Neither of you knows what's under the NPC's cup. You make a claim that you try and make your claim better than your opponent, than what's under their cup, and then you pick it up and see what they actually have.
So the
authorities never bluff.
I feel like the authority would, the authority just has 4. To me, I would think that the authorities would have like totally revealed dice.
Oh, sure. They just roll 4.
And then they just roll 4, and then you would hide your dice, and you would say your number, and then the opponent player can call you.
Okay. Yeah.
So the opponent can be like,
because the authorities are just like out in the open, like, okay, here it is. Yeah. And if you're trying to bullshit the authorities, your opponent calls you on it. Sure.
And then, but then I guess that's the only thing is if your opponent never wants you to lose, then like if you want the authorities to lose, then your opponent can allow you to win, which maybe would be weird.
Yes. Anyhow, also.
Anyways, there's a lot of things going on. That's why I'm working on this design. Yes. That's our episode about pirates. We went through all of the ideas of what a cool pirate game would be, and especially in a different bunch of different sizes. And then we talked a little bit about the game I'm working on. If you have any questions, or you want to just try out or the game that I'm working on, give us a shout at contact@diceovereverything.
Yeah, or find us on Facebook. We're Dice Over Everything.
Yeah, and you can find the channel that I'm tracking the development on at Rules of Carnage on Buccaneer's Bluff under One Box Games. All right, this has been Alan.
Yeah, it's been Brandon.
Bye.